Joining me now is Mike Huckabee, former Arkansas governor and former presidential candidate. So, Governor, is this power grab legal, first of all?
Well, it's probably legal, but I think we've got to come to the place where we recognize that when the Democrats say we're going to get all this new money, I hope Americans step back and ask themselves, where are they going to get it? I'll tell you where they're going to get it, right from the pockets of working people. Rich people will have enough accountants and attorneys to avoid it, but the working class people are going to be paying it. And it always ends up that way. And when you say we're going to hit the corporations, oh, terrific, because corporations ultimately never pay taxes. They simply collect them, and they pass those taxes that they have to pay on to their customers in the form of higher prices and reduced shareholder benefits. So this is typical playbook for the Democrats. It's always failed, and it will again.
Well, when you think about the new powers that the Treasury Secretary would have to pick winners and losers, if you will, those who would be subjected to a more thorough audit by the IRS, I'm wondering if that fits. I mean, the parliamentarian apparently said this was okay to put into a reconciliation bill, but it seems like something much more than reconciliation. It seems like new kind of legislation that's supposed to be decided not by the executive alone, but by Congress.
Well, it should be something that is put into the legislation. I think you make a great point. It's probably unconstitutional. It's granting power to a bureaucrat that really should be legislated. But it's never stopped Washington before. And in fact, over the past few decades, one of the things that we've seen that's been most hurtful to the American public is that people have ignored the very distinct roles of three branches of government, and you have executive branches just going out there and doing whatever they doggone well please with executive orders. And the reason they get away with it, nobody rises up from Congress to stop them. Nobody files the lawsuit. So maybe we'll see some states' attorneys general get involved and say, hey, you just can't do that.
Well, and we're also going to see a lot of voters get involved in November. And I suspect that the more they look at this, because of these aspects of the bill that so really track what we saw during the pandemic, when there were these extraordinary power grabs, I would say unconstitutional power grabs for our sake, you know, for the sake of people's health, for the sake of this, for the sake of that. And of course, they were rules for thee, not for me. They always violated those rules that they came up with. This is another example of that.
It's a classic example of it, and I truly believe that I wish that every member of Congress, before he or she was sworn in, would have to pass a basic civics class. I'm convinced most of these people never took civics in the 9th grade because they act like that there's not really three separate branches of government that have equality but also have accountability to each other. Founders had a brilliant idea. It might work if we actually followed it, but right now we're not seeing a whole lot of following it in Washington, and it's to the detriment of the American people.
Well, as the American people begin to see these audits on middle-class Americans, on small businesses who can't afford to have a long contracted battle with the IRS, and as they see that this is not just for those few billionaires. You don't hire 87,000 new IRS agents for a few billionaires. You hire them in order to audit everybody and assume that a lot of people are just going to give up and send in a check. But isn't this an opening for Republicans to say, look, we don't have to supersize the IRS. We can downsize the IRS by coming up with a simpler tax code, maybe something like a flat tax, so where you don't need all those IRS auditors.
Boy, wouldn't that be a great thing. You know, I've long advocated for the past 20 years the fair tax. I wish I'd invented it, but I'm certainly a proponent of it. It is a flat tax, but it's a flat tax on consumption rather than production. And one of the features of the fair tax is it eliminates the IRS because you don't pay taxes on that which you produce. It would be absolutely revolutionary to our economy, and it would be something that I wish the Republicans and, quite frankly, Democrats too should champion, because every single taxpayer benefits when they're not punished for their productivity, whether it's work, savings, investment, capital gains, and they pay taxes when they buy something rather than when they create something. Creating something is how the economy gets stronger, and we punish it, which is the essence of our tax code.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
The bottom line is, Mike, if you if you have a simpler tax code, you don't need to supersize the IRS. You can't. You really don't need the IRS. You just need essentially a collection agency to be that simple. Finally, I got to ask you, the first time you and I talked, I don't know if you remember, it was like 25 years ago. The subject was term limits and the question of whether the entitlement of these professional politicians has gotten to the point where we have to have some kind of term limits. Is there any possibility that any Republicans would have the gumption, the backbone to suggest that now?
No. In a word, no. I wish it was true. You know, I was for term limits when you and I first met before I was ever elected to anything. And I'm one of those people that the longer that I have been involved in politics, the more I'm for term limits. A lot of people get into office and then suddenly they say, oh, you know what, we need this experience and wisdom. Well, quite frankly, what we need is every now and then we need to flush that porcelain bowl, clean it out, and put some fresh water in it. And that's what term limits would do. And I'd love to see them. We have them in the executive branch. I think we need them in the legislative. And let me go on a limb. I personally think we ought to have them even in the judicial branch.
Yes.
Let people have an extended time, but nobody ought to get a federal job and think that they're going to be there for the rest of their lives and for several of our lifetimes as we're trying to pay them off.
Governor Mike Huckabee, great to see you, Mike. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.